Let's talk about IPS, Intrusion Prevention System. So I'm gonna add here IPS, and then later we're gonna compare IPS to IDS. Now take note, the main difference of IPS and IDS is IPS doesn't not only monitor but also block or prevent from potential attacks or malicious traffic. All right, now what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna create a topology. Okay, so here's our topology. Let's say this is the internet, and I will connect our router, then the firewall, and I will connect our IPS. So this is our IPS there. Okay, and behind IPS we have our internal network. Now I'm gonna make this super simple. It can be complicated and it can be large, but I will just add a few nodes. So PC, server, and let's say this is wireless access point. Okay, there. Now take note, IPS is always inline. You see that? Inline. Usually it's sitting at the network edge, also known as network perimeter. So routers, okay, which is connecting to service provider network, the internet or the WAN, and then you have a firewall, and then you have the IPS. Take note, traffic comes first to the firewall, and then if it's allowed by the firewall, then we have the IPS to inspect or analyze our incoming traffic. All right, now the most common detection. Now I will just add here that IPS is always inline. Okay, always inline. What else? Usually it sits at the network edge. Network edge. All right, or sometimes we call this network perimeter. Now, why network edge? You see, by placing IPS at the edge or network edge, the organization can detect and also prevent malicious activity before they can enter and affect the internal network. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add here, this is our IPS sitting at the edge of the network, and this allows us to detect and prevent malicious traffic before entering internal network. Okay, and this is the internal network. Internal network. Now, also take note that the most common detections for IPS, signature based or the definition based, probably the most common. And I'm gonna add here detection methods. Okay, these are signature based. And we also have the behavioral base. Okay, maybe you're thinking, what's the difference? All right, so the signature base, sometimes we call it definition base. This is when the IPS uses database of known vulnerabilities or known attack patterns. So this type of attack can be easily, okay, behavioral base. So what's the difference? Okay, before we talk about the difference, here how IPS works in action. So let's say we have an attacker. Okay, so somewhere in the internet, it sends traffic patterns. The first thing will happen is it will be inspected by our router. So this can be a simple ACL. It can be stateless. Now, once this traffic is allowed, okay, let's say this is SSH or HTTP traffic, it will be allowed by a router. Okay, it will then be inspected by our firewall. Now this is firewall, so it should be stateful inspection. It can be application based, but it's not signature based. Once the firewall allowed this traffic, it will now be inspected and analyzed by IPS. Now again, how can the IPS detect malicious traffic? First is the signature based. Okay, now when we say signature based, this is definition based, and it uses database of known vulnerabilities or known attack patterns. Now let's say this guy is sending scene flood. Okay, scene flood, we're using TCP. It can be randomized, it can be many different methods, but this may be allowed by our router and firewall. Now this type of attack can be easily identified by an IPS through signature based detection with the use of the database or known attack patterns. Now the second is behavioral based. Sometimes this is called anomaly based. Now as you see, I'm gonna add other user here. Okay, so this user or users, let's say 100 of these, so they are sending traffic, normal traffic, and this will be collected and analyzed by our IPS. Okay, it identifies the normal behavior by creating baseline. So as it sends to the internal network, whether server or other endpoint devices, IPS collects and identify and form a baseline pattern. Okay, now this baseline pattern will serve as the normal behavior. IPS will actively monitor network against this baseline. But when it detects, let's say this guy again sends, okay, this guy sends malicious traffic, it will be allowed by our router and then the firewall. But IPS can detect an activity outside normal behavior. Okay, so this IPS detects that this activity is normal or outside normal behavior. Okay, and when it's outside normal behavior based on the baseline that we created, it will consider it as a potential attack and it will block the traffic. Okay, again, scene flood or traffic outside the normal behavior or normal pattern will be blocked. Yes, you as an admin or you as a security engineer always have the option to choose which action whenever IPS detect potential threat. You can either do block or you can just use monitoring capabilities. Okay, monitoring with the use of logging. So these are the two actions.